Welcome to Short Movie Channel. The movie begins with a girl named Sophie having a terrifying nightmare. Strangely, she sees her father in the dream standing right in front of her, just watching without helping. She tells her father, Paul, about the scary dream and how he was there but didn't do anything to help. However, Paul doesn't take her words seriously. A little later, we see Paul saying goodbye to his wife as he heads to work. It turns out he's a professor at the university. We then see him giving an important lecture, trying to engage his students, but he quickly notices that no one seems interested. Nobody is really paying attention. A few hours later, Paul finishes work and goes to a restaurant to meet an old friend. At that moment, a waitress asks Paul if they've met before. Paul is surprised by the question and tells her that this is the first time he's ever seen her in his life. Then he goes to sit at the table, waiting for his friend Sheila to arrive. We learn that Paul played a huge role in helping Sheila when she was writing her book. Now, he has come to meet her and asks her to mention his name in her book because he is an outcast, someone nobody likes. He wants people to recognize him. After a short while, Sheila arrives, and they start talking. Paul finds out that she has finished the book and is about to publish it. He immediately asks her to include his name so he can gain fame and recognition. He believes that without him, she wouldn't have been able to write a single word. But Sheila refuses and even denies that he ever helped her in the first place. That night, we see Paul with his wife Janet outside a theater. She asks him what happened with Sheila. Paul is afraid to tell her that Sheila refused to mention his name, so he lies and says that she agreed. After that, they go inside to watch the play. When the play ends and they step outside, Paul unexpectedly runs into his old lover, Claire. She greets him warmly and asks when he got married. He tells her that he has been married for 15 years. Claire says she's happy that he found the love of his life. Then Claire reveals something strange: she has been dreaming about him. Paul is surprised and asks her what exactly she's been dreaming about. She tells him that in every dream, he just stands there, doing nothing, showing no reaction to anything happening around him. She also mentions that just last night, she dreamt that her friend had an accident, and while she was desperately trying to wake him up, Paul walked past without even stopping to help. Paul is shocked because her dream is eerily similar to his daughter's nightmare. In both cases, the person dreaming was in serious trouble, and Paul was there but did absolutely nothing. Claire tells him that she spoke to her therapist about these dreams, and the therapist suggested that Paul should attend the next session with her. The therapist believes these dreams could be connected to unresolved issues from their past. Claire asks Paul to meet her the next day, and he agrees. They exchange phone numbers to stay in touch. Later that night, when Paul gets home, his wife Janet is feeling extremely jealous. She asks him if he still has feelings for Claire. Paul reassures her, saying that he forgot about Claire a long time ago and that she has nothing to worry about because he loves her and would never think of cheating. The next day, Paul meets Claire at a cafe. She tells him that she's writing a new article about psychology and asks if she can include her dreams about him in it. Paul is thrilled by the idea and immediately agrees because he has always wanted fame. Later, when Paul arrives at work, he overhears his students talking about him. They say that they have all seen him in their dreams. Paul is shocked and starts to feel uneasy. He then goes to the university dean and asks if he has ever dreamed about him. But before getting an answer, Paul receives over 100 messages on his account from different people, all saying the same thing: they have been dreaming about him and want an explanation. Within a short time, Paul becomes incredibly famous. His story spreads everywhere, and news outlets begin reporting about him. One day, when Paul enters his lecture hall, he finds all his students applauding him. Naturally, he feels overjoyed because, before this, no one ever cared about his presence. Paul tells his students that before the lecture begins, they have 5 minutes to ask him any questions they want. They immediately start asking why he appears in their dreams. Paul admits that he has no idea. Then, Paul realizes something even stranger: he appears in everyone's dreams in the same way. No matter who dreams about him, he is always standing there, showing no reaction, and never doing anything to help. After the school day ends, Paul returns home and notices that his daughters are trying to get closer to him and seem to love him more than before. That night, Jana tells Paul that people at work respect him even more now because of him. Paul feels incredibly happy, realizing that appearing in people's dreams has actually become something beneficial. After a while, they both go to bed. But then, a strange man breaks into the house, holding a knife. He enters Paul's room and tells him that he must kill him. However, suddenly, the man collapses to the ground and starts apologizing to Paul. Moments later, the police arrive and arrest him. One of the officers informs Paul that the man is mentally ill and undergoing treatment. The officer also tells him that what happened is just one of the downsides of fame, as most famous people face assassination attempts, and this will likely happen again. Because of this, Paul decides to protect himself as much as possible. He installs security cameras and an alarm system in his house. Later, Paul goes to meet the dean of the college, as he is his only friend. Paul asks him to help him understand why he keeps appearing in people's dreams. The dean explains that this phenomenon is related to parapsychology, a field that studies strange cosmic phenomena that have no explanation in our world. Paul then tells him that he has decided to take advantage of his fame to publish his book. The next day, Paul arrives at a famous advertising agency after they requested a meeting with him. After a few minutes, an employee named Molly greets him, and they take the elevator together to the meeting room. While in the elevator, Molly tells Paul that she dreams about him constantly, but she refuses to say what her dreams are about. Once they reach the meeting room, Paul meets Trent, the agency's director. Trent explains that he selects celebrities to appear in advertisements for famous brands. He tells Paul that he specifically chose him to advertise the world's most famous soft drink because Paul is currently the most well-known person in America. However, Paul responds that he isn't there to do commercials, he came to ask for help in getting his book published. Trent agrees to help publish Paul's book because he wants to work with him in any way possible. After the meeting, Molly approaches Paul and tells him she wants to meet him that night. Paul agrees, and they go out to dinner. During the meal, Paul asks her about the nature of her dreams. Molly reveals that she has had romantic dreams about him. At that moment, Paul feels embarrassed and doesn't know how to respond. Then, he notices people taking pictures of him, which makes him uncomfortable. Molly suggests they go to her place to continue their conversation. A little while later they arrive at Molly's house, where she starts describing what she saw in her dreams. She then asks Paul to reenact those dreams with her. Of course, this request makes Paul very nervous, so he quickly leaves. Shortly after, Paul starts appearing in nearly everyone's dreams, but this time, he takes on a frightening and harmful persona. As a result, he goes from being a beloved and famous figure to someone people avoid. Everyone starts fearing him, and even his students stop attending his lectures because they are terrified of him. Paul doesn't understand why people hate him since these are just dreams, and he has no control over them. Later, Paul and his wife are invited to dinner at his friend's house. When they arrive, they find that none of their other friends have shown up. His friend explains that everyone canceled. Meanwhile, Paul notices that his friend's wife, Carolina, seems nervous and avoids talking to him, which he doesn't understand. After dinner, Carolina leaves the table and goes to her room. That's when Richard, Paul's friend, tells him that his wife is uncomfortable around Paul because she has also dreamed of him several times trying to kill her. This is also why their friends didn't come to dinner. Paul appeared in all of their dreams as an aggressive and terrifying figure. The next day at college, a psychologist holds a therapy session for the students who have been having nightmares about Paul. She tells them that the best way to overcome their fear is to confront it directly, which means facing Paul himself. The psychologist then asks Paul to enter the auditorium. The moment he steps inside, the students panic and run out as fast as they can. At that point, Paul feels completely hopeless and frustrated. He goes to his car, ready to leave, but finds that someone has spray painted the word, loser, on it. He starts cursing in frustration. That night, while Paul is with his family, he notices that his daughters have gone back to treating him the same way they used to, they no longer respect him and even blame him for harming people in their dreams. Paul gets angry and tells them that it's not his fault and that they should be supporting him because they are family. The next day, Janet arrives at work and learns from her colleagues that the manager has cancelled the project she was working on because of Paul. That night, we see Paul putting his little daughter to bed. She tells him that the kids at school are bullying her. She asks why he appears as a harmful figure in people's dreams, even though he's not like that in real life. He explains that dreams are formed in the subconscious mind and that no one can control them. However, Paul reassures her that he would never do anything to hurt her or anyone else. The next day, Paul calls Trent to ask if he will help publish his book, but Trent apologizes and says he can't. He explains that Paul has become an outcast in society, and if he supports him, his agency might lose business or even shut down. Later, Paul goes to a restaurant to eat alone. The waitress tells him that the customers feel uncomfortable with his presence and asks him to leave. Paul gets upset and insists that he won't leave until he finishes his meal. A customer then steps in and orders Paul to leave, but he refuses. The customer then makes an extremely offensive gesture toward Paul. Unable to tolerate the insult, Paul gets into a fight with him. A little later, Janet arrives, and Paul gets into her car to go home. On the way, Janet tells him that he needs to apologize to people. Paul gets angry and says he did nothing wrong to apologize for. Janet tells him that she almost lost her job because of him, and that his daughters are getting bullied daily because of his reputation. That night, Paul has a dream where he is walking in front of his house when suddenly, a strange figure appears behind him and starts shooting arrows at him. As the figure gets closer, Paul realizes that it's actually himself. The next day, Paul records a video of himself, crying uncontrollably, apologizing to everyone for appearing in their dreams and disturbing them. He says he finally understands how they feel after seeing his own dark side in his dream. Paul humiliates himself in the video, begging for forgiveness, saying he can no longer live a normal life. His wife and daughter see the video and are deeply upset by how he presents himself. His wife tells him that she's embarrassed to be married to someone like him, and that she wants to divorce him. The next day, Paul goes to his daughter's school to watch her play. One of the school officials sees him and asks him to leave, but he refuses. Paul then goes to the auditorium and knocks on the door. A teacher opens it and asks him to leave quickly before anyone notices, but he refuses, insisting that he must watch the play. The teacher keeps trying to stop him. In the struggle, the door slams on the teacher's hand, causing her to scream in terror. She starts crying and accuses Paul of attacking her. Paul is shocked by her reaction and tries to explain that it was an accident, but no one listens. His daughter is completely humiliated. At that moment, the crowd turns against Paul, and he is pushed to the ground. After that incident, people stop dreaming about Paul. To this day, no one has found a logical explanation for why he appeared in their dreams or why he suddenly disappeared from them. There was also a major breakthrough in the world of dreams when a scientist named Berg invented a device called Noor. This wristband allows anyone who wears it to travel into other people's dreams and even control dream events. We see Berg demonstrating the wristband to a live audience, showing that he can enter his own dream and then travel into the dream of a young man in South Korea. Back to Paul, he officially divorced his wife and bought a new house to live alone. He takes his daughters on a tour of his new home, then drives them back to their mother. Later, Paul meets Janet and tells her that he's moving to France because he has signed a deal with a publishing house there. It's clear that Paul still loves Janet and doesn't want to leave her, even though she has already moved on and is in a new relationship. That night, Paul falls asleep and has strange, random dreams with no meaning. When he wakes up, we discover that he had been wearing the Noor wristband but couldn't control it, which explains his weird dreams. A few days later, Paul arrives in France and visits the publishing house. His book is successfully published and becomes a huge success. Despite all the fame, Paul is not happy. He constantly misses his wife and thinks about her all the time. One night, Paul falls asleep and enters Janet's dream, where they share beautiful and romantic moments together. And that's where the movie ends. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the film,